and welcome to another edition of Tuesday Table Talks. We are the Warehouse Church. I am Pastor Sherman Bradley, and this is
Pastors Sadell Bradley.
And we are excited to bring to you tonight another edition with a special guest, Sarah Drake, who is a master's of arts and
in clinical mental health counseling, and she holds is a licensed professional counselor.
So welcome, Sarah.
Well, we've had a lot of talks about a whole bunch of groups of people with some mental health counselors earlier. We've talked with men. We've had a general thing about anxiety with COVID. And we are a multi-ethnic and intergenerational and multi-class church at the Warehouse. And so we value the opinions of all ages and all spectrums. We have a senior Bible study that happens at 6:15 on Sunday nights. We have youth, we have children. And today we kind of wanted to focus a little bit on millennials. You are not just a licensed counselor and a recently graduated master's receiving student, but you are also a millennial. How old are you?
27.
27 years. And so we wanted to take advantage of the fact that you have both this experience as a counselor as well as your life experience and how you might be experiencing the pandemic right now. And so what we want to do first is we want to kind of put out some opening thoughts and then let you share a reflection on them. I was looking at this article that talked about a Blue Cross and Blue Shield Millennial Health Report. And the report found that 92% of millennials say that coronavirus has had a negative impact on their mental health. And there were increases in a bunch of different categories: a 20% increase in smoking, a 34% increase in alcohol consumption, a 17% increase in vaping, and a 16% increase in non-medical drug use. And there were also some other, I was reading another article that said 39% of younger millennials have COVID having to move back with their parents. So they're experiencing financial struggles. And millennials were already experiencing financial struggles prior to COVID, but now they're having more. So now 3 out of 4 younger millennials are, and that's age 24 to 29, are concerned that the coronavirus pandemic will impact their finances. And 57% say that COVID-19 has derailed their plans for financial independence. And they had thought that by 30, they would be independent, and now they're not. So there's a lot going on with the younger generation, much of which even prior to COVID, they were blaming on the boomers and the Xers. So that might even get worse. Give us your initial thoughts about millennials and the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's often when we're talking about the pandemic, we're not thinking about millennials, right? They're the ones that are best off, or they're the younger generation. They're the most protected, in a sense, from the virus itself, and that the most impacted are the at-risk populations. But yeah, I think we forgot about the millennials that are working the restaurant jobs, working all the hospitality jobs, a lot of the jobs that have been completely shut down and haven't even been able to reopen to full capacity, ones that can't be done online or remotely. That's a significant impact. So many millennials have lost jobs. I think they're one of the higher unemployment rates of all the generations from the pandemic. And so I think while millennials aren't taking the blunt end of the virus itself, I think millennials are taking the blunt end of the impact of the global pandemic from an economic and financial standpoint. And I think those statistics that you read, the mental health, the substance use, the increase in all of those issues kind of shed light onto that something's significantly hurting the millennial generation right now.
So we want to make sure that you guys understand that you can go in the chat and ask any questions that you would like to ask for Sarah, and we'll do our best to answer them. One of the thoughts that we have is that many young people are feeling a sadness in Generation Y and Z as they watch major life milestones like graduations or proms or birthday parties, driver's tests, all vacations, all those kinds of things roll by without being celebrated. And you had the unfortunate situation to graduated during the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about how the sadness or the disappointment might be affecting people who are younger?
Yeah, so that was something, I mean, when I was wrapping up grad school, while not having a graduation was disappointing. I mean, it was the start of a pandemic, and I'm trying to finish all my final papers. I'm trying to apply for my license. I'm working on, trying to take my exam, which is pushed back because of COVID. Can I even work without my license? All these things happening at once. I think in initially, when, okay, no graduation, I wasn't too upset about it. But then as it approached and as I actually started to finish school, I was like, wait a minute, so I'm just going to turn in this paper and go to work the next day. Like that's it. It's over. Oh, well, there's that. I guess I finished this 2-year degree. That's okay. I guess it's done. Guess I move on with the rest of my life. It was really uneventful, and and that's when I realized, I think, how important celebration actually is. I guess I always took it for granted, but it provides a lot of closure in a sense, in a sense of accomplishment. And I mean, I was still able to celebrate. It just looked a little different. I mean, my family, I was able to FaceTime them. They played the graduation music. I used my phone on my head for a hat because I didn't even order the cap and gown. So, and just that personal reflection, I think I'd never actually done that as much as that time.
When we drove to your house to do a little small celebration, that was the first time any of us had done a COVID drive-through graduation celebration. And then when photographer, I guess, got with you and say, hey, you really need to take some photos.
Mm-hmm.
Where were you prior to him saying, hey, you need to take some photos. This is a milestone.
Yeah, that's when I was at that point of really just like, we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's not that important. Like, I'm living my life now. It's like, I think we literally took it like a couple weeks ago, the pictures. And I was like, literally, I graduated 4 or 5 months ago. Like, it seems irrelevant now. But even in taking those pictures, seeing myself in a cap and gown that I borrowed from somebody else, and getting those pictures back, I really reflected a lot on that accomplishment and where I'm at now, and just how much how proud of myself I really was. And I was really, really grateful that our photographer did push me to that point, because I was like, there's no point. It's way beyond the point. But he really pushed me to, that's a part of the celebration, is to capture it. And I was like, oh, I'll always remember this one. I mean, it's not one I'll ever forget.
Yeah, it'll be hard to forget.
So would you have any kind of advice for parents or students that might be going through this now, people who might be graduating in December, or any of those kind of things? Or maybe they didn't have a chance to do it in May, and maybe now there's something that could be done now. Would you have any advice?
I think just doing something, doing anything with people, I think is important. And I think it provides a lot of, amidst all the negativity that we're dealing with, just to have that light, something to be positive about, something to celebrate. I think that's super important. I know for my nephews niece's birthdays, we've done virtual little birthday parties where they mail us like how to make a cupcake in a mug, and they mail us some balloons and some napkins and a party plate, and we have our virtual birthday parties. I think it just sheds a light on how creative we can be during such a time like this.
So I'm interested in, at what point did you decide to become a counselor?
Ooh. Well, my mom growing up was a school psychologist. So I think I've always been exposed to the mental health world, more so than other people. And so I think I originally, when I went for my bachelor's, I went for nursing. I just went for a job that had financial security. I'm a people person. I want to help people. As I got into nursing, I realized that it wasn't until I started, the clinicals, like actually engaging with patients, that I realized this is not what I want to do. This is a lot more task oriented. I have to really remember things. I'm not the best at that. If I mess up, that's really going to hurt somebody. And so I realized actually it was more task oriented, and I wanted to engage with the patient more. I actually wanted to sit there and talk to them. And I was like, wait a minute, there's a whole field for this. And so that's what really led me to it, being around, seeing especially women struggle through sexual trauma. I think I developed a huge heart for that recovery and what it looks like. Seeing a lot of hopelessness and in that area, and just really wanting to help those women, to serve those women. But I've developed a heart for so many different things I never thought I would after getting into the profession and into the field. So I love it.
That's wonderful that you're able to find something that you really love that fits you. And inside of your work as a mental health professional, some of it is with low to moderate income people. And so you get to experience how that group of people is experiencing the pandemic. And what would you say that their top concerns are?
Yeah. So I feel like when I think about this, most of my low SES clients, low income, I don't think they've ever talked about their concern of contracting the virus themselves or becoming sick. I mean, so many of them, especially right when it hit in March, were in crisis every time I saw them. Just the financial impact it had on them. When a significant amount of people lost their jobs, they were able to file for unemployment and get those unemployment checks to make do. And I know a lot of people, weren't able to have those unemployment checks come in right away. There were so many people filing, things were happening. And while some could make do, my clients, if they didn't get that paycheck from unemployment, if there was an issue, they couldn't buy food. They couldn't buy diapers for their kids. They couldn't have their basic needs met. And then looking at, okay, where do I find all these resources during the middle of a pandemic when, these face-to-face interactions are more limited, and there's more outreaches, but not even knowing who or where. We had all these resources before, but now there's new ones, and really just trying to be able to connect our clients and just this crisis of, can I survive? Can I even make it through? Will I end up on the streets? Will I end up homeless through this? Never once was it, am I going to get the virus? That was never a concern. It was, how do I survive?
What have been some of the challenges from transitioning to in an office face-to-face to now having to do counseling virtually?
For me personally, like doing in-person counseling, was that the
versus now having to go viral doing them versus virtual versus...
Yeah, so actually my clinic, Icron Corporation, we actually never went remote. We have remained in person the entire time. We offer remote and virtual services to individuals who ask for it or request for it, but that's actually another interesting piece, is that almost all other agencies have shut down and only do virtual and remote, but they had to turn away so many clients who don't have access to video camera or a phone, or they have to pay for minutes and they can't pay for a session because they were coming for free. The government was paying for their counseling sessions. So, I mean, a lot of our clients, we would have had to turn away from services if we went virtual. We had a lot of referrals right in the beginning from people who couldn't do remote services and they needed to do in-person services, and we could be that connection point for them. The other agencies in the area, they might have more fundings. They could provide a phone or an iPad or a source for them to use, but we don't have that funding. So we remained open for those who benefited from it. But the virtual sessions, the remote sessions that I have had have been extremely interesting. I've really noticed that for a lot of these clients, their home may be where the trauma occurs, or their home is where their main stress source comes from. And that counseling room is the one safe place in their life. In that room with me is the 1 ounce of safety they find in their life, and trying to counsel them amidst the traumatic environment it just feels near impossible.
Wow.
I notice trying to help them through coping skills when they're at home versus when they're in the office is night and day. But it also provided for them to learn, okay, so I learned the skill in the office. It was super easy. I went home and it doesn't work at all. And now that they're learning it amidst all the chaos, they see how challenging it is and they're able to persist more. So I think there's benefits and drawbacks from both. But in the end, I think being able to provide those services in both ways, depending on where the person's at, if they need remote or if they need in person, we're able to do that. And that's, I think, the important part.
So if we go kind of talking about the mental health of millennials at this moment, when we did our preparatory conversations, you were talking about how millennials were already struggling with the job market and the difference in their collegiate experience from their parents and grandparents. This is now the first generation who does not expect as a guarantee that they would make more than their parents. So there's some anxiety about the future, and there's, college debt and some other things. And then you add COVID-19 to that. Can you talk a little bit about what young people might be thinking and feeling now?
Yeah. So especially for the millennials that have had that double punch, right? First, the 2008 financial crisis. They were just now getting to a point of stability. And then this new financial crisis that's just beginning is now hitting them. And that's on top of, coming out of potentially, thousands of dollars in debt that they're trying to pay off, and entering into, especially during a financial crisis, entering into the workforce with the lowest salary starting out, and then having to try and climb your way out of that. That's what the older millennials have been struggling through up until now, from 2008. And so now the people entering into the workforce, the millennials entering into the workforce, are facing that same thing, if they can even find a job. And so I think a lot of it is just, you come out of school with this heavy load of debt on your back, and you're expected to go make a life for yourself, and you can't even get a job, or you get this extremely low salary that you're trying to climb out of. That type of hopelessness and it is that can be unbearable. We often, have pointed the finger at millennials, like, oh, you guys are so lazy. Like, why aren't you making all these career moves? You're not focused. You're not driven. You're you're not getting married, you're just staying single, you're not having kids. What are you doing? You're going to end the population. When we really look at it, they're trying to create stability for themselves before they have a family. I mean, financially, I've heard it so often now. I mean, I feel like we've heard it as often, but millennials are the ones that are saying, kids, I can't afford that. Completely just writing off even having kids because we can't even finance ourselves. How could I ever finance children? And so these stepping stones are being delayed and pushed off because of this. I mean, so much is, I think, being impacted, and I think not having empathy from older generations, potentially having this, like, we did it, why can't you do it? When, I mean, if we look at, what minimum wage was 30 years ago and what tuition cost 30 years ago and how much student debt was actually taken on, we're looking at completely different numbers, and millennials have been honestly dealt really poor cards when it comes to their finances.
So you were talking about empathy and the need for empathy from the older generations to the younger, and probably vice versa. There is a disconnect that we're really seeing in there, and there are judgments that are happening, back and forth. If you had some advice for the Gen X or the boomer population, even outside of their grandkids and kids, but how should we engage? What ways of thinking or behaving would ingratiate us more to millennials that would help us to bridge this divide?
That's a hard one. Because I feel like what millennials need, they may not want.
Good.
And when I'm thinking of that, I'm thinking about the connectivity piece, which I'm sure we'll get into later, just about especially millennials and their disconnect from human interaction. But I think that's what millennials need most, that, I mean, Gen X and the baby boomers could offer millennials. But how that will be received, I'm not necessarily too sure. That's what I crave, but I'm also in a field where I'm connecting with people all day, every day. It's a part of who I am. So I don't necessarily know how others will be in that sense. But I think often millennials might feel attacked by older generations. And so maybe that's older generations offering that empathy, like maybe even acknowledging, like, okay, yeah, you definitely have it worse off than I did. How can I help? What wisdom can I offer you? Like trying to understand what millennials might be going through and what wisdom you can offer them, outside of working harder, because I don't necessarily know that one can work harder in the situation that they're given. But
yeah, I think that, when the Bible talks about let no man despise your youth, but be an example of the believers in your word and your conduct and your conversation. When I started off as a leader, I was a young leader amidst a bunch of older leaders. And those gaps, they exist every generation. The Bible talks about how one generation should praise God's glorious works to another, that there is supposed to be this kind of synergistic relational stuff. And the older women are supposed to help the younger women, and the older men are supposed to help the younger men. And this idea that we all have something powerful and something valuable to bring to the table. I can say, as a Gen Xer, that some of the richest, most influential people in my life are younger than I, from whom I learned a great many things. And then there are people who are older and people who are the same age. but there is a richness that comes, particularly as the times change. And it's not just help me with my cell phone and help me with the technology, because I don't pick it up as quickly, but to understand your perspectives where we're looking at the same situation. You know, we might be looking at politics, or we might be looking at the pandemic, and I'm seeing one thing and you're seeing something else that could be valuable to me. And, you know, our hope is that we would be able to come together. And one of our questions, you know, as you and your friends maybe are talking, how do you feel like generationally you guys are viewing this COVID-19 situation?
Yeah. I feel like we hear a lot of like, oh, millennials are just out there partying. They could care less about COVID-19. But I feel like personally, from my experience with especially all my friends and my interactions with millennials, is that there's some of the individuals I know that are taking it the most seriously. I am always hearing millennials having to convince their parents to stop going out, to stay in, to wear their mask, to take it seriously. Um, and and then not only that, but I've heard of multiple occasions where millennials are going into the workforce and trying to advocate for just simple social distancing and these protocols that we should be following regarding COVID set in place. I know many people that have reported their places of work because they're not following guidelines. And it's the millennials that are pushing for it. So I feel like in my experience from the millennials that I've personally engaged with, a lot of them are really caring about their parents, their grandparents, their loved ones, and are concerned for them, and are wanting to make sure all the proper protocols are taking place.
It's important for us not to do a broad brush to say all millennials or all Xers or all boomers think a certain way.
Right. I'm sure there are still, I mean, who's out there partying? Somebody is. And so it's either millennials or Gen Ys. So of course there's going to be people out there not.
Yeah, some of the challenges on colleges, campus are proving that some aren't taking it as wisely as they need to. With that said, with the inactivity that comes with the closing of restaurants, the closing of bars and nightclubs, or the diminishing numbers of those that are actually open, and then some of them you just won't go in because they're so small and you can't not have close proximity. What are alternatives that you see are taking place amongst millennials to try to still engage in ways that are healthy?
Throughout summer, I've seen so many outdoor activities that have been taking place, which I think was great. I think a lot of millennials are engaging, whether that's going to people's houses in smaller groups. But I think most millennials, aside from their in-person interactions, are engaging a lot more over social media and online platforms. I think there's been a significant increase in the use of social media, online dating apps. It's been great for the online dating app businesses and everything, but there's just a lot of more virtual and online interactions than ever before.
So from, you know, mental health perspective, there's like boredom, there is disconnectedness, that you feel like it's connecting through the media, but it's not the same as quote unquote real connections. And even when we're trying to do Zooms or connections it's not quite the same as an in-person situation. So are we getting to the point of overuse of media to kind of self-soothe or distract, or binge watching, that kind of stuff? What effects does that have on the psyche if you're too focused on social media or media?
Yeah. Oh, it's awful. If you haven't yet watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, I would highly recommend it. I think it's a real eye-opener for how social media impacts us at all. And it's pretty severe. I mean, and we saw this even before the pandemic. I mean, within mental health diagnostics, we're seeing internet addictions, gaming addictions, social media, all of these things becoming diagnostic criteria for mental health. They're real and they're extreme and they're so easy to become addicted to. I know I even will delete my social media and fast from it because I'll get too stuck to it, especially during the pandemic is when I've struggled. I see myself drawing to it more because everyone else is drawing to it more. There's more I have said it to my roommates and stuff like the pandemic is the best thing that ever happened to social media. There's so much creative stuff on here now. Like it's so entertaining and it's hard to get off. But it's meant to be that way. It's designed to keep you coming back, and it releases the same type of chemicals in your brain as drugs do. It's the same type of addictive quality. I mean, forget your phone for a day and notice how many times you feel that phantom vibration in your pocket, or you go to check for it, or I mean, it just shows this addictive behaviors that we all kind of have to technology, and it's kind of scary. But especially for millennials, I think we've noticed, especially with the rise in mental health and the rise in substance use, just how that can play out. Because I think there's been a huge engagement in social media, and then we also see all those numbers rise as well. The limited connectedness, the fake connectedness that happens through social media. We think we're engaging, but we're not. There's the endorphins, the chemicals that are released from actual human interaction aren't happening over a phone or an app. And then we're hanging out with our friends, but we're not talking to them. We're sitting on our phones. We're sharing YouTube videos with each other. We're still not even connecting. I mean, how many millennials do you see walking around with headphones in at all times? I'm guilty of it. I'll be listening to a podcast. I mean, it's just so convenient now, but it's truly, I'll be in a grocery store and maybe somebody tried to talk to me and I wouldn't know because I've got my headphones in. You're completely limiting yourself from human interaction at all times. And that can be extremely isolating. And then we see the comparison that happens on social media, comparing your worst to somebody's best. I mean, especially for Gen Y, it's so debilitating to their self-esteem, their identity, their self-worth. It's rough. We see the cyberbullying. It's so easy to insult somebody you've never seen in your life. It's a robot. It's not a real person.
And we're not helping because the Gen X's and the Boomers are fighting with texts over things, political things, racial things, economic. So if you have these millennials and now the millennials are 26, 29, 30 something, and they start having children. And now the children are on screens all day in virtual school, and then they're on screens playing video games. What is the long-term implication of all of this screen time?
I'm not actually personally educated on what it's doing to your I don't know, your eyes or your brain looking at a screen, but just the lack of interaction with humans, the lack of creativity in kids. I mean, they're not, and for kids, play, like active play is their work. It's how they process emotions. It's how they learn, it's how they develop, it's how they grow. When we're sitting a screen in front of them, of course it's convenient. It's so easy as a parent, especially right now during COVID. You need a break. It's hard, but it's so important for their development to learn how to play on their own. I mean, imagine a generation that's never had a down moment in their life. It's going to be rough. You have to learn how to sit alone with yourself. I struggle with it, and I know it's so needed. It's so important. Um, I mean, even as Christians, as believers, this is a struggle. How often are we using our phones? Are we using technology to connect with God rather than just sitting and being with God? There's so many ways that our connectedness and our addictions and our screen time is preventing us from quality of life.
So how would you counsel someone who's come to you and they're overly entrenched in screen time on a variety of different fronts? It could be gaming, it could be social media. How do you assist someone understanding the significance of what it is that they found
Binge
themselves
watching on
entrenched in?
Netflix.
Yeah, big one too.
Yeah, I would approach it as I would any other addiction. I would You identify it's a drug. Even though you're not consuming a drug, it's your brain is responding like it's a drug. A chemical is being released. It's the same response. It's treated the same way. It's an addiction. It's compulsive behaviors, and you approach it in that way. And so much of treating addiction, I mean, the number one thing is social supports.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot do it alone. It's not doable. When you get to the point of chemical dependency, which is an addiction to screen, it's the same thing. A chemical is being released, and you've now become dependent on that chemical being released. Every time you engage again, you're reinforcing that same behavior over and over again. And at that point, it's uncontrollable. You continue to go back, and you do it without thinking. And so it's building your social supports, building that connectivity, and it's within addictions, it's often your sober supports, right? So people that are encouraging you, that are for you, that are with you, that you can come to in those moments of weakness. I need help. Help me, because I can't do it. Because in addiction, you cannot do it alone. So who are you going to turn to? Who is going to assist you through it? Your relapse prevention plan. What are you going to do instead of using? You've used this as a tool of coping, of escaping. You use it in boredom. You use it to celebrate. You use it for any type of heightened emotional experience. Okay, so what are you going to turn to do instead? You're removing something huge from your life. You're going to have a huge gap of time. If you sit too long, you're going to go right back to it. So what are you going to do instead? Building these coping skills. There's so much involved in treatment of addiction, but the number one thing I believe is social supports.
Well, the other thing is that people are not thinking, they're thinking it's the pandemic. I'm stuck in the house. What else can I do? I'm sure that people are not thinking about all of the mechanisms that social media platforms and media platforms put to keep you coming back for more, as a part of, the draw that now I am addicted, the way that I would be a food addiction, or I would be a drug addiction or a sex addiction. But over these last 8 or 9 months, something is changing in our brains, and something is changing in our perception of what is possible to be done. People are lonely.
Mm-hmm.
They may not be, Sherman and I live in the house together, but people might be living in their home by themselves. And so, getting a roommate might be a solving problem, or to have within your bubble or your We had an epidemiologist say that you have to have a bubble of people that you continually are around to have that companionship and to keep safe, to keep being around that bubble of people. It would seem that the loneliness factor, the isolation, might be larger for people who are living by themselves. And then if you go 8 months, you haven't been out on a dating scene. You know, if you were thinking that you were less than because you didn't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend before, now you're sitting in COVID and you're sitting by yourself. What happens to the loneliness factor, and how do people overcome that?
Yeah, and even when you mentioned you and Pastor Sherman living together, I mean, even in relationships, there can be loneliness. I mean, you can have as many people in your life as you want in close connected relationships and still feel lonely. Loneliness comes from a deeper place, but specifically in this situation with isolation that we're seeing. I mean, there's only one way to really address that, and it's to engage with your social supports and in a manner that's satisfying the isolation. So not just texting a bunch of people, not just stalking people on Facebook. Genuinely having conversations with people, if at all possible, in person. Like having your bubble of people that you're regularly communicating with, or maybe that's meeting other people and doing it in a social distanced manner. But I just, for mental health, it's so important to have those human connections, and vulnerability and emotional intimacy is key in those relationships to address loneliness. Oftentimes we can be our own barriers to connection. We won't let our guard down. We won't let people truly see us. We won't let people help us. We stay in our world. Oh, I don't want to burden them. They're too busy. They've got this, they've got that. Sometimes it makes somebody's day for somebody to reach out to them and say, help. Mm-hmm. Sometimes for me, being in a helping profession, I'm helping people every day, but still when a friend calls me and is like, help, it does something. And having those deep conversations with people where you're connecting with people. I mean, I know that I'm a very social person, and so I'm diligent. I know I cannot go a week without having at least one person that I'm having deep, intimate conversation with, if I can, in person. I schedule phone calls. I schedule FaceTime dates with my friends, family. I know that I need that. And so I plan it. It's not just when I see them. No, I schedule. I'm very diligent about making sure that that's a part of my life, because I know what happens if I neglect that. If I isolate, and what happens to my mood, what happens to social media engagement. These are the protective factors in life that protect our mental health.
So now we're in like this fall going into winter. And in addition to COVID, we'll probably have flu. And then there's seasonal affective disorder. You know, we've been told that holidays, don't go meet with your family. And so most of all of the connectivity things that we normally would have during the season are going to be changed or curtailed in some way. And generally in those situations, even with your close family, you were kissing babies and having touch. Mm-hmm. You know, it's one thing to have interaction and vulnerability and transparency and conversation. What is all of this lack of touch? How is all that affecting us, and how's it affecting younger people?
That is a great question, and I think we will see. I don't think we've necessarily ever been through something like this in this sense to know what the outcome will be. I think we can see like cultural differences. Certain cultures are more, I don't want to say touchy, but show affection in a physical manner more than other cultures do, and that might be an indication. Some and but the one thing that comes to my mind when I think about the human touch and when that's lacking is when the studies that have been done on babies, when their basic needs have been met. They've been provided the bottle, they've had their diaper changed, they have toys in their crib, but they weren't cuddled, they weren't held, they weren't soothed, they weren't touched, and the significant mental health issues that they suffered from, the significant developmental delays. Some of the infants died literally from a lack of touch. I think that is just shows how important physical touch really is in the development of human, and I would argue even throughout a human's life. And whether that's finding your small bubble, your small bubble of people you're okay with not wearing masks with, and being okay and just saying, all right, this is my crew, this is what I'm doing, and being okay with that, to have, if that's a sacrifice you're willing to make, and being okay with that physical touch throughout that. In other situations, while we can't, if we can't receive it from others, there's many self-soothing techniques for when I'm specifically thinking of trauma victims, where touch is very difficult for them. A part of that healing journey can be self-soothing things, such as finding like soft materials and just rubbing it on their hands, like a weighted blanket that applies a lot of pressure, even hugging yourself, holding yourself, even like massaging your hands, massaging your legs, massaging your feet. Oddly enough, I mean, it's not from another human, but those types of things can release oxytocin, the same chemical released from engagement with humans. Maybe that's watching videos of cute kids, of cute pets, animals. If you have animals, engaging with them, it releases the same hormones. But trying to make do with what we have if we can't engage with other people.
And there are individual masseurs that can travel one-on-one if you found one that you trusted. But even if you have a roommate, you have a brother or sister, or somebody within your bubble, I think that the awareness and the empathy of conversation and touch being important. Now, I read one place where it says you need like 14 to 15 meaningful, non-sexual touches a day. So if you happen to be listening and you've got kids, you've got a wife, you've got a husband, you've got a roommate, you've got a friend, you've got a brother or sister or somebody, try to make that as part of, and even when we go through SAD, to open a window, and whenever it's sunny, even if you got to put a sweater on to get outside to get that vitamin D. And then we're single people, millennials, how do they feel about getting counsel? So if you were somebody and you say, hey, I need to talk to somebody, maybe I don't have a lot of money, how could they get counsel?
Yes. So in the Cincinnati area, I know off the top of my head a lot of counseling agencies that are affordable. ICRON being one of them, Central Clinic, GCB, Greater Cincinnati Behavioral Health, Talbert House, I think Catholic Charities. They have they offer really low counseling services. I know online BetterHelp, they have like higher set prices, but I've heard that they do have a sliding scale. You can always look online and see if they have a sliding scale, especially for millennials. If you have that entry level job and you don't have a very low salary, that can be in your benefit. Um, I those are some great starting places.
Would you care to list your company's domain and access points for people who may be watching and say, I need to make a call tonight, tomorrow?
Yes. So Icron Corporation is located on Vine Street, closer to UC's campus. And our phone number is 513-621-1117. And you just set up an intake appointment. And then from there you can mention that you're interested in counseling, and you can get set up through that way.
Can you tell us, we are obviously a church. What are your thoughts around millennials and church and how they perceive it? We are kind of in a postmodern, post-Christian kind of society where even now, because of the division that's going on in the church, that may be repelling some millennials, that may be, but one of the places where the kind of comfort, the kind of friendship, the kind of fellowship, the kind of care that people need is inside of a community of faith. Do millennials perceive that is the case? Say more.
I would say from my experience, I've definitely had those conversations with a lot of millennials, where, well, from my experience, Christians are some of the most judgmental people in the world. That's often what I hear from millennials, or that like the church is just so religious. I have my own spirituality. I have my own relationship with God. I don't need the church. And honestly, for me, the only thing that I have to say in those situations is, here's my experience. And I tell them, yes, I've had similar experiences where I've experienced extreme judgment from people I thought would be the most loving people, and that hurt really bad. And yeah, I wanted to run and I wanted to turn away, but then I moved and I tried it again. I tried a new church, and this is my experience. I have found tremendous support. I have found unconditional love and acceptance. I have found a community that just embraces me for who I am, and only wants to help me better my relationship with God. They understand that people are people and we're all on a journey. And that's where we're at. And I inform them, of my experience in pursuing my relationship with God, and that the most, oftentimes the closest I've felt with God are the times where I'm in a close-knit community of other believers, that I could say I would not be where I'm at without other believers, without a community. I mean, gosh, just prayer, worship. I mean, these things are just so much better with other people. It's just, there's so much more power. Talking about spirituality, that's where you're going to find it. I believe that community, people, interactions, humans connecting is just such a beautiful part of God's creation.
You are also a certified fitness trainer.
I am.
And there is a close connection between mental health and fitness in terms of remedy.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how those two interact and how they help through a time like this?
Yes. So the wonderful thing about physical activity and exercise is it can be the same as it can have the same effect on you as a drug can. It's a natural drug, and it's a healthy drug. It releases chemicals within your body that lift your mood. I'm not even talking about the physical benefits of working out at this point. I'm just talking about the mental health. Of course, I love the physical health benefits. That's honestly never why I've worked out. I work out for the mental health benefits. It's, for me, I can't work out less than 3 days a week. It's what it gives me energy. I use it as an energy source. If I go too long without working out, my body will tell me, my mind will tell me. I notice the withdrawal of not having the physical exercise, because it's that good for us. It's that good for our minds. And then not only that, but yoga. This is one thing I've recently learned a lot about. The connection between our mind and our body is so powerful. For so many of us, we're so disconnected in that sense. Oftentimes I'll ask my clients, and where do you feel this emotion? And they say, what do you mean? I don't understand. Where in your body do you feel the emotion? It's such a disconnect that we don't even understand emotions are felt and stored in our body. Where in your body are you experiencing this? And once I get through so many sessions, they can be like, oh, it's right here, and it feels like this, and it's doing this. Yes, now we're connected. Doing yoga is one of those things that helps connect our mind to our body. And that can be just therapeutic in itself. Once you connect the two, your mind is now able to process through your body. When you're doing these yoga movements, when you're exercising, you're releasing things from your mind. They've proven that sometimes talk therapy for trauma survivors, it almost like can't even be done at some points, because trauma is almost stored within the body. The fight or flight is the response part of your brain that comes up, not your cognitive, let me think through this situation. That part shuts down. So sometimes trauma clients, all that they can do are these movements, and that alone can be so healing and therapeutic, and can sometimes process more for trauma survivors than talking about the experience or talking through it or processing it. And so I am a huge advocate of connecting the two in my personal experience, and seeing that with other people. Physical activity, physical engagement, movement, it's so important to our mental health.
Not to mention diet.
Oh, yes.
So, we're about to close, and we are so grateful for having you today.
Thank you.
And we want to give you kind of a closing thought, but there are so many great things that you said. But one thing that I think that we need to say as older people is that God moves in seasons of your life. And this season of your life as a millennial is just that. It's a season, and there will be, Lord willing, many other seasons. You're going to look back on this probably 5 years from now, and there will probably be things that you will laugh at, or you'll tell your kids, you can't believe we had to walk everywhere with masks on. But
I laughed today.
the hopeful thing is to look forward, to not consider a particular moment in time your whole life.
Yeah.
Because God can do immeasurably more than we can ask or think in the next season. And so sometimes you have to ride it out and do the things that you said, love one another, be with one another, touch one another, smile with one another, celebrate milestones, take care of our physical body, take care of our mental health, exercise, eat right, so that the quality of life that we have can be as best as possible. You don't even know. They might have a bill 3 years from now that cancels all your student loan debt.
Ooh.
So let's live it out, do what we can to move things forward. But I want to give you the last word as we thank you for coming today. Something you would say to your millennial friends out there.
Put your phone down and go talk to somebody and have a meaningful conversation and do something meaningful and purposeful with others.
That's great advice.
And if you need a location to do that with, we would love to have you at the Warehouse Church, where we are a connected group of citizens in our community who are longing to connect with others and provide a safe place for us to learn and to grow and to evolve and to weather storms like these that we're dealing with now. I can appreciate what you said from the very beginning about those that were working through the 2008-9 crisis and now having this, and I'm hopeful they will learn that what they went through and overcame then, that they have tools to overcome this as well, and so that they can ride this out. But for those that are looking for a safe place, again, we welcome you to join us, the Warehouse Church, where transformation begins. This has been another edition of Tuesday Table Talks. We thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us. And for those of you that are watching, we'll be back here again sometime soon. Join us tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Yes, since we ended with fitness, let's talk about gluttony and its forms. We know it's not just food, but food is a major draw for us, that we try to anesthetize our pains with food. So it'll be an exciting time to hear from her tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. And as always, 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings, you can catch us for a service online live. Again, this is the Warehouse Church. We thank you for joining us. God bless you. Be safe out there.